Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Brooklyn-based Jazz Saxophonist, composer, and Beat Maker Kazemde George. He talked about his newest 2021 CD, I Insist, and his life in music. This CD is his debut and is a collection of original music with a stellar band. He was raised by Caribbean parents in Berkeley, California, and was exposed to a wide range of musical styles, and he has been playing the piano, saxophone, and percussion from a very early age. He's got a great story. Enjoy.
Hey, thanks for taking a minute out for the show today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
You know, we're entering this phase where we're getting on the other side of this whole COVID thing that hit the whole planet, and you have a new album, I Insist. What does it mean to release new material right now with the chances of being able to perform live and kind of interact with the fans?
Oh, yeah, I mean, of course, you point out it's like the whole music industry has been kind of reeling for a while, and we're just starting to come back. This music is music that is really music that I think of live, and even just the idea of recording it was always like, oh, this is going to be different to have this recorded as opposed to playing it at gigs. So it's nice to be back in the situation where we can do that again to some extent. So that's been really great. It's been great to reconnect with all the musicians that I've been playing with in New York for the last 7 years that I've been here. It's been a really good feeling, and I'm hoping that coming out of having this release, I'll be able to get a ton of new gigs and be playing all the time. That's my goal.
You know, this is your debut as well. There has to be a wave of relief to have your first album coming out right now.
Yeah, definitely. I'm 30 years old this year, and it felt like time. I've been playing jazz for feels like my whole life, and I never had an album out. You know what I mean? It's kind of crazy. So now I have an album out. Feels right. Feels like I'm doing it right now. Got to make another one soon too.
You know, the one thing too about COVID is that, you know, with the whole lockdown quarantine thing, we all had to be self-reflective. What did you learn about yourself during that time that's going to make you stronger as you reemerge with this album and go back on to the live stage?
Well, one thing that happened for me during COVID was that I spent a lot of time with, at the time, my fiance. And just a couple of months ago, we got married. So that's one thing I think that I've sort of learned is just I'm in it for the long haul with my wife, Sammy, who's on the record. We kind of dedicated ourselves to each other during this pandemic. And we didn't, we spent a ton of time together, more time than we maybe should have, and we didn't kill each other. So that's good. Other than that, I mean, I spent a lot of time shedding, and so I was able to focus in on some of my weaknesses musically. Sort of learned some new directions that I want to go in terms of improving my saxophone playing and musicianship in general. And it just reaffirmed for me, the importance, too, of just, the community. Because just, really not having the access to the community the way that we're used to for so long, really now coming back and being able to spend time with people in person, really value that, you know.
Your parents are Caribbean. You were raised in Berkeley, California. Talk to me a little bit about your childhood and how music and more specifically jazz became your life.
Growing up, my dad was a huge influence for me musically just because he has really diverse musical tastes and he's a huge music lover. So growing up, I listened to a lot of great music that usually kids don't get to check out. Like I was listening to Herbie Hancock Headhunters. My dad's a huge fusion fan, so a lot of Weather Report and Steely Dan and Return to Forever. A lot of Brazilian music, João Gilberto, and a lot of those recordings was João and Stan Getz. A lot of jazz, Coltrane and Charlie Parker, and reggae music, Bob Marley, Burning Spear, and other reggae bands that my dad's really into. And stuff like free jazz. I remember my dad used to put on Shape of Jazz to Come around the house. It was later when I was an adult, I listened to that album again after not really checking it out since I was a little kid. And I realized, man, I know this album back to front. I've listened to this thing a million times, and it was never that I chose to listen to it. It was just my dad had it on. But then as an adult, I also chose to listen to it. And it's man, this stuff is amazing. So that's really what got me into just music and having a really diverse musical palette, I think, was just my dad growing up.
So what was the first live jazz show that you saw that blew your mind?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is I saw Joshua Redman at Yoshi back when he was doing the Elastic Band with Brian Blade on drums and Sam Yahel on organ. And to this day, I really love those musicians and how they played together and all those tunes that they would play. So I remember that specifically being like amazing. And Joshua Redmond has been a big influence for me for a long time. He's another Berkeley guy. I don't know him personally that well. I think I met him once, so I wouldn't say I really know him personally, but definitely a huge influence for me.
You know, one of the parts of you, along with being a musician, is that in your mission, you want to really elevate communities of underprivileged youth through music and cultural education. Talk to me about how you're doing that and why that's so important for you.
I'm a teaching artist in New York City public schools, and that's one thing that I've been doing to sort of support myself and learn about education since I've been in New York. Yeah, I just think that a lot of our music, when we think about American music, really stems from black music and has so much influence from Latin music and stuff like that. All of this stuff is all connected, and I feel like bringing that knowledge to young people, that this is a part of your heritage that belongs to you. You know, whether that kid is white or black is not really my point, but just that this music is something that we can connect to and learn from about our history and about our culture, and just the music itself is awesome. That's something that I find really important in my life going forward, and something that I feel specifically poised to be able to do well, just because I play these musics. I come from, you know, a background of immigrants, and I'm black, and I really value education, and I feel that I'm just a natural teacher. My inclination in situations is always to teach the person I'm talking to whatever I know, and I hope that they would teach me whatever they know, you know, and that's kind of how I come into a lot of situations. So I feel like I just want to teach. This is the information that I have that I just find so fascinating and valuable, and so I just like want to share it with young people. And I can imagine a future where there's more kids growing up who have access to this kind of stuff, and we could really have a stronger culture than we currently do. So that's kind of why I have that as a goal.
It's very clear that you love to travel. You've been in a lot of different parts around the world, and obviously everything was put on hold. What did you miss the most about travel, and are you just itching to get out there? Do you have an itinerary of places that you're ready to go to?
Yeah, definitely love to travel. Have been missing it. Soon I'm going to California. In a couple of weeks I'm going to California to do a sort of regular residency that I do over there every couple of months. So I'm really excited that that's happening again, because that hasn't happened for the last year and a half. In terms of international travel, I really want to get on tour in Europe soon. Hopefully that will happen in the next year. I don't have anything on the books yet. But I would love to do some playing in Europe. I'm continuing to explore the Caribbean, which, if you read my mission and my bio, that's kind of become a real focus for me, is exploring the music of the African diaspora in general. And so being American, I feel like I have a lot of access to that side of it. But then the African diaspora is much larger than that and includes, like, you know, many countries, even in Europe, but specifically in the Caribbean. There's a lot of places where black slaves were taken through colonialism, and they have culture and they have music that I'm really fascinated by and I want to study. So my dad's from Guyana. I've been there. My mom's from Jamaica. I've been there many times. I lived in Cuba for a year and studied that music. But, like, on my list, I've also been to Panama. But on my list is, like, Haiti. I'd really love to go to Haiti and dive into Haitian music at some point in the future. And also Brazil is another huge one. I've been studying Brazilian music for a while, but I really feel like I need to go to Salvador and Bahia and learn a lot about that stuff. So those are my bucket list for sure.
You know, every day you get to wake up and you get to create. You get to have that opportunity to create as a musician. What do you like the best about being a professional musician? Well,
I love music, and I love musicians. I love hanging with musicians and playing. So that's a big part of it. I don't know. I mean, I'm grateful that I have a job where I am very passionate about it. I think a lot of people in their jobs in America or around the world, they sort of have to just submit to doing work that they don't necessarily care about, with the sole purpose of, like, I need this to make money to support myself. And yeah, I just feel really blessed that when I have to sit down and make my money, a lot of the times it's doing something that I actually really care about, whether it's the education stuff or performing or writing music or whatever. So I just feel blessed by that, you know, by having something that makes me money, that is my life, that I really love. And I really love music. It's to death. So that makes me thankful.
If you could get into a time machine and we get off the phone, it pulls up in front of your house, Jazz DeLorean door goes up, where are you going? Who are you going to go see in the annals of jazz history?
All the greats. I want to see all the greats perform live, man. Like, I've recently been checking out a ton of, and by recently I mean like the last 2-3 years, ton of Miles Davis bootlegs that I have. I got sort of a library of them, and that has been so fascinating to me, because I think everybody who, listens to jazz hopefully is familiar with Miles's style of playing, but there's another side to it, I think, that's a little hidden sometimes, because a lot of the recordings that we know were studio dates, and as a musician, I know that people play really different in the studio, tend to play really different in the studio than they do when they're on a gig, and there's somebody in the audience who they don't fuck with, and then there's some, there's ladies around that or there's guys around who they're trying to get with or whatever, and it's a different environment, and people play really differently. And like on these Miles Davis bootlegs, you can feel that they're playing different than same songs from the records, but they play it different, and there's so many different versions of songs that I know, and each one is different. And so having the opportunity to go see that live would be amazing. And in the case of Miles, I have all these bootlegs, but that's not necessarily the case for a lot of other people. So, like Thelonious Monk, I would love to see Thelonious Monk live if I could go in a time machine. Or, John Coltrane, Charlie Parker. These are kind of just my biggest heroes in general. So, yeah, those are big ones for me. Monk, Coltrane, Miles, Charlie Parker. Those are the first people that come to mind. Maybe Errol Garner. I love Errol Garner.
So why do you love this art form that we call jazz? What is it that has been so alluring to you throughout the years?
That's a good question. Well, I love music in general, and jazz just feels like a little part of it that I just had the grace to sort of grow up with a little bit through my dad, but also just through education. Like when I was in high school, I got to do the Oaktown Jazz workshops, which was led by Khalil Shaheed, great trumpet player who passed away. I felt like I learned like a lot of the jazz oral tradition through that program. And so on some level, it just feels like it's mine because I grew up with it. Yeah, I think music's a beautiful thing. One thing that I learned when I went to Cuba is about the value of this type of culture of music and dance and stuff. Because in Cuba, they have that stuff really, really strong. In Cuba, there's a lot of problems. There's a lot of poverty, and people struggle to survive in a way that most Americans have no concept of. But even in spite of that, their music and their culture is so strong, and it's very stark, that comparison, coming from America. And seeing these little girls who can dance like so well, like on beat with so much flair and so much understanding of the music and of the different moves that you can do. Like there's just like little 5-year-old girls that can do this. And the reason for that is because they're growing up with that around them all the time. And I just think that is so enriching to their lives. I think it allows them to find happiness out of nothing, essentially, just by pure virtue of human culture. And sometimes when I look at our American culture, I look around and I say, what are our kids learning about culture? And it's nothing nearly that rich. And so I really put Cuba on a pedestal in that one regard of they have this culture that permeates where, like another example is like the clave. In Cuba, people all can clap the clave. Whereas, and I'm talking about non-musicians, can all clap the clave. Whereas if you ask the jazz musician who's been training in music their whole life to clap the clave, it's going to sound like shit most of the time. It's not going to sound that good most of the time because they don't understand that feel. Versus these non-musicians in Cuba can do it. Like that, to me, exemplifies what I'm talking about. And so I love that about music, that it has that power to create a shared experience among people. Like in this example, I'm talking about Cuban people. They have that shared understanding of a clave. In our own culture, we have things like that too. And like I said, this is tying back into my education thing. I'm trying to get us educated as a society culturally to the level of what Cuba is at, where everybody has these like understandings and can communicate musically and through dance and through rhythm and melody, and song and poetry, better, because I just think we don't value these things as much in our society, but to me, those things are really valuable. And if we had those more, we'd have a better place to live. You know, that's it for me, man.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could explain it better than that.
No, that's a great way of explaining it. And I'm always enamored when I speak to people that are from Cuba because there is such an exuberance, not only in their music, but in their culture. It's all over the place. And it's
totally,
it's totally energetic and beautiful. So everyone has a perception or an idea of you, your family, your friends, your fans, but ultimately you live your life. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
That's a good question. Who am I? I'm a musician. I feel like that is a big part of my identity at this point. I am Caribbean and I'm American, but there's certain parts about my personality that as I get older, I realize, like, man, I'm really Caribbean. For example, like, my dad's Guyanese. Growing up in California, there are very few Guyanese people around. And so I think when I was a kid, sometimes I used to think my dad was just weird or something. But then now living in New York, and there's Guyanese people all over the place where I live in Brooklyn. And I'm realizing, like, oh, my dad's not weird. He's just like all of these people. He's Guyanese. I just had never had a point of reference. And so it's been interesting now being here and being like, oh, wow, I'm Guyanese. Like, there's things that I do that I probably learned from my dad and a way of being that didn't come from nowhere. And so that's part of my identity too, being Guyanese and being Jamaican. I think, like I said earlier, I'm a teacher. I think sometimes, almost to a fault, it's hard for me to get out of teacher mode when I'm talking to somebody. I'm trying to share my perspective on things and sort of elevate our conversation always with more knowledge and more understanding of things. Even when I don't know something, I feel like I approach it as a teacher. You know what I mean? I try to learn even like a teacher sometimes. That's a big part of who I am. And, just a music lover. That's who I am.
Right on, man. Hey, that's a great answer, great way to wrap everything up. Thank you for talking about the new album and about what's going on in your world of music. I appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Have a good one.
Thanks, man.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest cats in Brooklyn, Berkeley, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Kazemde for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.